Do the rich people cringe and say, don't tell them that, Robert?
Yes. Don't tell people what you know.
Right.
Keep them poor. So I remember raising my hand when I was 9 years old, talking to my fourth grade teacher, and I said, when am I going to learn about money? And she was this woman who should have retired 50 years earlier. She was so sick and tired of kids by this time. She says, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I said, what am I, in Sunday school? And I was this punky little 9-year-old kid. And she says, we don't teach money at school. I said, why not? And she couldn't answer me. And she got very flustered. She said, sit down, take your seat. And then I got curious. I said, why don't we learn about money? She says, go ask your father. He's my boss. So my father was the head of education, PhD, all that stuff. I go home and ask him, I said, why don't we learn about money in school? And he looked at me and says, because the government doesn't let us teach that subject. The government tells us what we can teach and what we can't teach. And I thought that was strange. And I said, but aren't we going to school to learn about money? He says, no, your job is to get a job. I said, but you get a job to earn money. He goes, no, you're supposed to just get a job. I went, no. Isn't the purpose of a job to earn money? He goes, you're correct. I said, so why don't I just learn about money? I can skip the job part, And he got flustered and he said, look, and my father was, for Japanese, very tall, 6'4", and imposing man, good guy. But he says, if you want to learn about money, why don't you ask your best friend's father about money? And I said, why? That's Mike. So why ask him? He says, because Mike's father is an entrepreneur. And I said, what are you? He says, I'm an employee. I'm a government employee. And I went, oh, what's the difference? He says, the difference is an entrepreneur must know about money, or they're no longer entrepreneurs. And he says an employee doesn't have to know anything about money, because the government will take care of them, the company will take care of them. So I'm all confused. But I took my dad's advice and I trundled over to Mike's father's office and knocked on his door and I said, hey, I'm here, 9 years old. Teach me about money. He says, beat it, kid, But that's where the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad started. And finally, through persistence, my rich dad started teaching me about money on one condition. And that condition was he would never pay me. He says, the moment I pay you, you think like an employee. He says, that's the trap. Entrepreneurs work for free. And now I'm 9 years old, my head's going cracking in half. He says, you never want a paycheck. You understand that, kid? I said, okay, I got it. And he says, well, how do I make money? He says, that's what entrepreneurs figure out. It's a cat, which comes first, a cat or the cat chasing its tail. And I said, so how do I learn about money? So he would just break out a Monopoly game board. So I would work for free. I'd pick up cigarette butts, and he had hotels and restaurants, and I would clean and do menial tasks. And as I got older, I started getting into office work and marketing and accounting, and I was an apprentice basically, but I always worked for free. And he would teach me about money, but the way he taught me about money was playing Monopoly. And finally one day I got upset. I said, well, when are you going to teach me about money? He says, what do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He goes, no. What do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He says, what do you think we're doing? So I don't know. I'm teaching you about money. And then that's when, you have one green house. He says, there's many formulas for great success in money. There's thousands of them. But one of the best ones found on the game of Monopoly. It still is today. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. I said, what? He says, one of the greatest ways to acquire great wealth is playing Monopoly in real life. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. Well, is that all there is? He goes, that's it. And he says, what do you think I'm doing? And I went, I don't know. So then he took me out and he showed me his greenhouses. And 10 years later, when I was 19, I was now in school in New York, and I come back to Hawaii, and Rich Dad had bought the biggest piece of land smack dab in the middle of Waikiki Beach And when you go to Waikiki Beach today, you'll see the Hyatt Regency Hotel. That was his hotel.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Acquired assets and they became bigger assets.
Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge, but knowledge empowers imagination. And what most people lack is real business knowledge, like accounting, like debt, like taxes. You got to know that stuff, but they don't teach it in school to anybody. So, and then when people ask me, how did your rich dad learn this when your poor dad, a PhD, didn't? And the answer is very simply, my rich dad, who's my best friend's father, his father died when he was 13. So rich dad had this family business at 13 to run. So he had to drop out of school, which was his blessing. There's blessings and, sometimes a blessing doesn't look like a blessing, but it turned out to be a blessing. And then his teachers became his bookkeeper, his accountant, his attorney, his banker, his real estate agents. So he has what I call real teachers, not these fake teachers in school. You see, most teachers in school, they're out of ethics. They teach subjects they themselves don't practice. I had the same problem in my MBA program. I got into arguments with the marketing teacher because the guy didn't have a business. And then I got into arguments with the accounting teacher because the accounting teacher didn't know accounting. I knew more about accounting than him because I actually worked in bookkeeping in my rich dad's companies. And so I'm not an accountant, but I understand accounting. So that was the end of my school years because I understood what a fake teacher is. A fake teacher is somebody who just wants a job and they'll teach anything. They teach how to shine shoes if you pay them more money. But they really don't know what they're teaching. For example, my calculus teacher, went to military school in New York, and I asked the teacher, I said, I'm in my third year of calculus now. It was called strength of materials. I said, am I ever going to use this stuff? He goes, no. I said, why do you teach it? He says, because I get paid. I said, do you ever use it? He goes, no. And that's why, you have to, in life, one of the things I suggest to people, you got to find a real teacher versus a fake teacher. And a fake teacher is somebody who doesn't do what they teach. And a real teacher is doing what they teach every day. So my accountants, my attorneys, they're in it every single day. And that's how I learn, because every day I'm solving problems in my business. So I have accountants and attorneys and bankers and all these people on speed dial because I'm solving problems with my team. It says poverty is passed on. It's taught in your families. And middle class is taught in families. And I was really happy that he endorsed Rich Dad Poor Dad on your program, because he says, I was taught by a rich man. And so the people right now who are sitting at home, who are struggling financially or worried about money or unhappy, they may be making a lot of money, but unhappy with what they're doing, it was probably taught to you. Your superego was taught, get a job, work hard, or you'll never be rich, or the rich are evil, or whatever.
And until you change your mindset,
Correct.
Money won't help you, right?
Correct.
And we see that with people that win the lottery, people that make more money, they still have the same problem.
Right.
Because they have that poor man's soul.
Correct. If you're poor, you'll always be poor.
That's really hard for people to understand.
Yeah, the money will disappear that fast. Just like most pro athletes, they make millions of dollars, and 65% are bankrupt 5 years later. It's because they come from poor families. Now you tell them that, they get very angry at you. It's not, it's the rich fault. It's you guys ripped me off and government ripped me off. But unfortunately, what Mr. Lipton was saying, it's passed down genetically. That's the frightening thing. So what Mr. Lipton was saying, what Trump and I are saying, and what Jim Rickards and Nomi Prince, we're saying, we got to change what we teach our kids.
Right.